zibranda dabos, yada branda badabos, yada branda badabos. Karabadabadabos, yada branda badabos, yada branda badabos. Yanda da branda da badabos, yada branda badabos. Cabrados, yanda da branda da badabos, yada branda da badabos. Thank you, Jesus. My blessings, Christian Abeidu. Brother Honorable Samuel Sapo, my blessings, bro. Let me remind you that we are live on Facebook's Gabriel Nakwesi Asenso. On TuneIn, it's Lens Radio or SAP Radio, or Modern Ghana's Gapco Radio. And now on YouTube is Gabriel Asenso. We are live on TuneIn, Modern Ghana, Facebook, and YouTube. We are praying. Isaiah 60 verse number 11. Isaiah 60, 11. Isaiah 60 verse number 11. Isaiah 60, 11. Therefore your gates shall be open continually. They shall not be shut day or night, that men may bring to you the wealth of the Gentiles and their kings in procession. We are praying. Lord, in the name of Jesus, let the gate of this month be opened for me. Let my gates this month be open for divine blessings. Ewade bosumi ma emu apono emie bie mame. Ma enhyira apono emie. Ma yeyo apono emie. Ma kankro apono emie. Lord, this month let divine doors be open for me. In the morning or in the evening. Doors of favor, doors of blessing, doors of peace. Lord, let it open for me. Lift your voice and pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Somebody pray in the name of Jesus. Lift your voice and pray in the name of Jesus. Lord, let divine doors be open for me. Lift your voice and pray. Kada brados yada branda da bradabos yada branda bradabos. Zehada bradabos yada branda dabos yada branda bradabos. Kadabadabos, Yibianda Bradabadabos, Yada Brandabos, Repa Dabadabos, Yada Bradabadabos, Yada Brandabos, Lekandabas, Yibianda Bradabadabos, Repanda Dabas, Yibianda Brandabadabos, Rekadabadaba, Rentadabadabos, Yada Brandabos, Yakandiri Andabos, Yada Brandabos, Yipranda Badaba, Reparabadaba, 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 Rantarabos, Yada Brandabos, Yada Brandabos, Yada Brandabos, Lekarabados, Yada Brandabos, Yipandabados, Yada Brandabos, Yipandabados, Yada Brandabos. Masi Brandabos, Yada Brandabos, Yada Brandabos, Likandabos, Yada Brandabos, Ripandabos, Yada Brandabos, Yaparabos, Likandabos, Yada Brandabos, Yaparabos, Yada Brandabos, Yikarabos, Yada Brandabos, Yada Brandabos, Rekazabos, Yada Brandabos, Yapadaba, Reparaba, 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 Rantarabos. Let my gates be opened. Lord, let my gates be opened. Let the gate of blessing be open. The gate of breakthrough, let it be open. Rabadabos, yada rabadabos, yada brandabos. Jesus.
I looked around.
Jesus.
But I picked the grape up and didn't put it in my mouth.
Beloved, open your mouth and begin to thank God for answered prayers.
The Spirit of God spoke to me and said, Bernard, you were able to risk your health to pick this grape.
Open your mouth and begin to thank God for answered prayers.
Exactly what I did. I killed my only son to reach out to that brother, that sister.
Even though we are thanking God, but we've not finished with the prayer.
God gave his best to reach out to you. You are that great and he will never let you go.
Today,
you are,
we will pray more.
Satan has died for you. As you sing,
just thank God for how far he has brought us.
Move.
Just thank him for answering our prayer.
And do whatever you're doing under the canopy of the song. The power of the Holy Spirit is lifting you up from the grave, from the pit, from the miry clay, wiping away.
Thank you, Jesus.
Cuddling you in the walls.
Thank you, Jesus.
He gives you hope and life and vitality again.
Thank you, Jesus.
In the name of the Lord, proclaim to the powers that be. Missy, oh yeah.
Thank you, Jesus. God bless the precious one for making time to be with us.
Oh yeah.
Listen, the whole of this month, our theme is divine visitation and announcement.
Oh yeah.
Or the season of divine visitation. The whole of this month is our season of divine visitation. And I want to read something from Luke chapter 1, verse number 26. Luke 1:26. Luke 1:26. Luke 1:26. Now in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a city of Galilee named Nazareth. Now in the 6th month,
Let's talk to him right now. It's a call to prayer.
The angel Gabriel was sent by God to a city of Galilee named Nazareth. We are in which month? We are in the 6th month. It is my prayer that may God send an angel your way. May God visit you this month. I want us to pray. Today I'll be preaching and praying. We are praying at the same time. As I said, our theme for this month is divine visitation. Divine visitation. So we are praying, Lord, send an angel my way this month. Lord, send an angel my way this month. Listen. The angel sometimes will not come as the angel we know. But the angel can come in the form of man. Bible says people have entertained angels without knowing. Maybe your angel is the husband that you are praying for. Maybe the angel is someone that will go and speak on your behalf. We pray the Lord send me an angel this month. As the angel visited Mary in the 6th month, Lord also send me an angel. Right before those that hate you, Busumi erade mabofo bi mesrame. Erade busumi mabofo bi emesrame. Lord, this month send me an angel. Lift your voice and pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Somebody lift your voice and pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Lift your voice and pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Lift your voice and pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Lord, send me an angel. Lord, send me an angel this month in the name of Jesus Christ. Repandi adabos yadabos rekanda adabos yadababa rekante adabos yadababa repandi adabos yadababa repandi adabos yadababa rekanda adabos yadababa repandi adababa repandi adabos. Divine visitation. Lord, send me an angel this month. Lift your voice and pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Repandi adabos yadabos rekanda adabos yadabos Repandia da Barabaha, Ricada Barabos, Yadabos, Repandia da Bos, Yadabos, Repandia da Bos, Yadabos, Ricada da Bos, Yadabos, Ricada Barabos, Yadabaha, Repada Barabos, Repandia da Bos, Repandia da Bos, Repandia Bos, Ricada da Bos, Yadabos, in the name of Jesus Christ. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus.
He's a good parent.
Good morning, Auntie Anapoku. My blessings.
He is our counselor.
Thank you, Jesus. Genesis 21, verse 1 to 7. Maybe the whole of this week will be dwelling on this scripture. Genesis 21, 1 to 7.
When you feel like rejected, singing.
Genesis 21, verse 1 to 7.
Good counselor, sing it again.
And the Lord visited Sarah as he has said. And the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken.
I would never abandon you. He's the
Love it, listen.
peace everywhere.
When the Lord visits you, he confirms his word. He makes his word in your life become a reality. Se erade besrawa,
Sing it.
you are kafa honomani bem. I know you've received a lot of prophecies, but this morning we are praying. Lord, let your word concerning my life become a reality. Lord, this month, let your word concerning my life, every prophecy that you've said, every good prophecy that you've given me, Lord, let it become a reality. Erade, wakafa me ho busumi mu afi mu na watwi mu. Binya opomane emrem. Binya opomane emrem. Lift your voice and pray the name of Jesus. Somebody pray the name of Jesus. Kadabos yanda branda dabos yanda branda dabos. Lift your voice and pray the name of Jesus. Lord, let every word you said concerning my life, Lord, make it a reality. Lift your voice and pray the name of Jesus. Rabadabadabos yanda branda badabos. Zebros yada brada badabos yada brada badabos. Lift your voice and pray the name of Jesus. Rabadabadabos yada branda badabos yada branda badabos. Thank you, Jesus. John B. Mad blessings. Thank you, Jesus. For Sarah, verse 2, that is Genesis 21, verse 2. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time which God has spoken. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born. And Sarah said, God has made me laugh. All who hear will laugh with me. We are praying. We are praying. Lord, this month, this day, visit me, and Lord, cause me to laugh. Erade na watwi ene day busumi afi binya opo besra me nema me so me nsiribi. Lord, cause me to laugh, visit me, and cause me also to laugh. Lift your voice and pray the name of Jesus. Somebody pray the name of Jesus. Somebody pray the name of Jesus. Lord, visit me and cause me to laugh. Lift your voice and pray the name of Jesus. Makada badadabos, yada branda badadabos, yada branda badadabos. Rapa dabadabos, yada brandabos, yada branda badadabos. Rapa dabadabos, yada brandabos, yada branda badadabos, yada badadabos. Lord, visit me, and Lord, cause me also to laugh. Lord, visit me, and put laughter in my mouth. Somebody pray the name of Jesus. Maka branda badabos, yada branda badabos, yada branda badabos. Rapa dabadabos, yantaraba rabadabos, yada branda yanabos. Zihanda dabros, yada branda yanabos, yada branda badabos. Reka bragadabos, yada brandabos, yada brandabos. Leka bragadabos, yada branda badabos. Reka tabadabos, yada brandabos. Reka dabos, yada brandabos. Lera badaba, reka dabadabos, yada brandabos. Lede antarabadabos, yada brandabos. Leka dabadabos, yada brandabos. Reka dabadabos, yada brandabos. Leka dabos, yada brandabos. Reka dabadabos, yada brandabos, yada brandabos. Leka dabos, yada brandabos. Leka dabadabos, yada brandabos. In the name of Jesus Christ. Thank you, Jesus. I pray for somebody that may God visit you this month. May you encounter God as never before. May God turn every sorrow into laughter. I pray for someone that may God visit you and speak on your behalf. This week, may you encounter a strange visitation of God. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Lift out his countenance upon you and grant you his peace. In Jesus' mighty name. Someone shout a big amen. My blessed precious one, I believe someone has been blessed this morning.
We are ready to Pentecost. Are you ready? Play it again. Come on.
My blessed Auntie Anna Poku. And someone is a Jima Sapo. Mami Phyllis. Honorable Samuel Sapo.
Jesus.
Uncle Steve Aqua. Mamia Fewa. Apostle Chris Asari.
Jesus.
John B.
Jesus.
Bridget Ajimai. Christiana Beidu. Eric Kweku, Regina Dako. God should bless you all for making time to be with us. I believe you've been blessed this morning. This month is a month of divine visitation and announcement. May God visit you as never before. As you step out this day, may you encounter an angel that will change your story. It is my prayer that God will visit someone for you to call or send a message and say, Pastor, the Lord has visited me. Because of that, I come and look at my house. The Lord has visited me. He has blessed me so much. I dedicate these cars for me. I want to bless people with them. May God bring you to the point where you can call and say, Pastor, can I meet you somewhere? And when I come, or when we meet, say, Pastor, dedicate these shops for me. 10 shops. God has blessed me with them. May God bring you to a point where you can say, Pastor, the Lord has blessed me beyond measure. Lord, Pastor, I want to give this car to you as a blessing. May God bring you to the point where you can say, Pastor, the Lord has blessed me so much. Pastor, this house is for you. May God visit you and bless you to the point where you can say, Pastor, can you give me somebody that I can help? Somebody that can bless. May this be someone's story. To God be the glory. Today is another day, another week. I pray that may God order someone's steps.
Take your handkerchief.
Let me see your two hands up. Let's praise the name of the Lord.
Samamoya Sudina. Samamoya Sudina. Samamoya Sudina. Samamoya Sudina.
Song at the background is from Man of God featuring Ohima Mercy, the praise medley.
Soup.
Very soon I'll be out of the studio. But if you want to get in touch with us, the number to call plus 233-244-085-201. Plus 233-244-085-201. Or plus 233-2680-49894. Plus 233-2680-49894. That's be your friend, your pastor, your nephew, your son, your grandson. If you liberate the Lord, Pastor Gabriel Nakwesia says so. Others call me Efukwashiga Gabriel. If you've been blessed, give all the glory to God. And as I always say, whenever you pray, please remember me in your prayers. And also pray for our covenant partners. Pastor Letitia for Surenchi, my blessings. I don't do what the Bible says you shouldn't do. Have a blissful week. Let's meet tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. for Inspirational Moment. Shalom. Adios.
The kind of dance you are